I think I'm going to start now because the number seems to, the participant seems to already all enter, right?
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Por Heong Hong, a member of GERAK. Before I go on, I would like to invite you all off your microphone now. Thank you. But you can leave your video on if you like, but please off your microphone. Now, welcome to this webinar, which is jointly organized by GERAK and ESPACT. GERAK stands for Pergerakan Tenaga Akademik Malaysia, an organization formed by academics and for academics. Meanwhile, ESPACT is an education service organization, and this webinar is recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube later. So this is the first of a series of upcoming GERAK ESPACT webinars. And it has been more than a year since the outbreak of COVID-19, and we have gone through at least 2 rounds of movement control. And pandemic is actually bigger than a health issue. It's more than a health issue. As medical historian Frank Snowden said, every society produces its own specific vulnerabilities. And it takes a pandemic to lay bare a society's all pre-existing conditions, politically, socially, economically, culturally, and not just apart from knowing and experiencing all these vulnerabilities of our society, how we together as a community can move forward from this or move further from this. So tonight's topic is recovering from the pandemic, rebuilding and setting a new direction for society. And we have 3 guests here tonight. Each will deliver a 15 to 20 minute presentation before we open up the floor for Q&A. Meanwhile, you can also, while you are listening to their speech, feel free to type your opinions or questions in the chat box. The chat box is at the lower part of your Zoom frame, depending on whether you're using a handphone or a laptop or a computer. So you look for the chat box and then you can type your opinions there. And then I'll read it out at the end during the Q&A session. Now, first of all, let me introduce the first speaker to you all. That's Dr. Jeyakumar Devaraj. He's very famous. He's a medical doctor and also the chairman of Parti Socialist Malaysia. And he was a member of parliament for Sungai Siput from 2008 to 2018. So let's invite Dr. Jeyakumar first, and then we'll move on to other speakers later. Dr. Jeyakumar, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Por. Can you hear me, I hope?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it okay? All right. Okay, good evening, everyone. Our topic is rebuilding and setting a new direction for society. Can I have the slides, please? Actually, when we are all affected by this COVID pandemic, but it's not like that we are on the same ship, you know? Next one, please. We're not on, it's not like that we are all on the same ship undergoing the same condition. Can I have the next slide? It's more like that we are on different ships on the same sea. The same storm is affecting all of us, but some of us are more secure and some of us are much more in a perilous kind of situation. And that's the reality of COVID. We are in the same situation, the same sea, but we are in different boats. So when you want to talk about new direction and rebuilding, we've got to see where we are now. And if you look at our society, next slide, please, we can see that we can divide our population into different groups. We have a 16 million workforce. About 1.6 are government servants. We have 6.5 million people working in the formal sector, which means that they have SOCSO and EPF paid for them, and they're under a formal contract. And then we have another group of people who are the micro businesses. These are the small gerai-gerai, goreng pisang in the night markets. We have another 2 million people in the rural areas, smallholders, kerja kampung. And we have another about 3 million plus workers in the non-formal sector. And the way in which this pandemic and the shutdown impacted these people differs quite a bit. Can I have the next slide? You see, like in the formal sector, they had no, previous one, please. Go back one. No, go back two now. Go back some more. Okay, the formal sector workers, okay, the government sector workers were the most protected in terms of income. This is not to deny the fact that they played the biggest role in controlling this whole COVID pandemic. They were the frontliners in our hospitals. They were the frontliners in the police, helping with the movement control order. They were exposed to the elements. They were at danger of getting risk of COVID. All that is true. But in terms of financially, their income was stable. The formal sector workers were not too bad. Most of them didn't lose jobs. And even those who lost jobs had the EIS, Employment Insurance Scheme. There was a wage subsidy scheme. The government spent about 18 billion, around that, 18, $20 billion, paying about $600 per worker to the company per month to keep them in work. And also they can go for ICINA, they can go on their EPF savings, they can take out the EPF savings. So they had some cushion. When you go down to the next one, please. When you go down to the micro businesses, the 2 million people having the real small stalls, the only thing they got directly was the grants. There was a grant given to these stall owners, about 3,000 one round, and then after that another 1,000, and then I'm talking about another 1,000 coming in April. Micro credit schemes, I'm not sure how many of them really benefited, and many of them don't have very much EPF. So the ICINA, maybe they got something, a small amount. So this is what the micro. So they were worse off than the formal sector workers in terms of financial support during COVID, and a lot of them were affected. Businesses had to close. The pasar malams, the small stalls in the markets, and all that outside the markets had to close. Go further down, you get the self-employed in rural areas. These two groups, self-employed and the informal workers, only got this bantuan prihatin, a total of about 3,005 in the various, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. That's the only thing they've got in the last about 15 months. Some of them have got ICINA, some of them, but some of them, many of them, the informal workers, and or say a small holder, a tapper, they won't have much EPF to rely on. So this is the batch, especially the informal workers. Many of them are people who work in, say, restaurants, washing dishes, who help out in the small stalls around. Please go back one. Please go back one. You've gone to the last. Go back. Go back. Go back. Go back. So the contract workers, you got to go right back to the. Go back. Go back. Go back. Go up some more. Go up some more. Okay, right. Number 7. Yeah. So these people are the informal workers are probably the ones who are most affected because they lost jobs. The people who help loading, unloading, the contract workers. So the impact of COVID on people was very varied. The people, the informal workers were the worst affected. The self-employed also badly affected. Micro businesses very badly affected. Formal sector workers not so bad, also affected. Government servants pretty good in terms of income. And of course, the billionaires made money. I mean, we saw in the papers how the richest people in the world probably made about 30%, the wealth increased by 30%, but that's a different issue. Go to the next one then. So and you can also expect the impact is different, and also the recovery is going to be varied. Certain sectors, okay, keep the slide. Certain sectors are going to take a long time to come back. I mean, tourism, traveling, aviation, it's going to take some time to come back. So it's going to be a varied thing. And some people have been knocked off the cliff, Some of the people, the informal sector workers, the micro businesses, they've lost money, they've gone into debt, they've got loans to pay back, and they're trying to come back up, and they're also not on a very definite footing in terms of income. Yeah, next one, please. So when we talk of building back, rebuilding, We got to see whether we're going to go back to the old idea that, was pushed around the world by, the economic planners, by World Bank, by IMF. Leave it to the markets. Just focus on growing the economy, make the economy business friendly, get in investment, get in trade, let the economy grow, and everyone will be happy. That is the old, we call neoliberal thing, that the market will give you maximum benefit to everyone. Or in yellow, we got Kita Jaga Kita. That's what the slogan that we use, and I think it's very apt. The slogan that we used in handling the COVID pandemic and the economic recession, that we said the market will not work. The government has to intervene. Society has to intervene. Those who are the poorest, those who are the most affected, that government must come in. So we got to see for ourselves, are we going to continue with that? Are we going to continue with the Kita Jaga Kita mindset and approach, or are we going to go back to living to the market? And I think when you're talking of new direction for society, I think we got to go to Kita Jaga Kita. That we got to look at a rebuilding program based on solidarity. That we all try to help each other, and especially help those who need the most help. Next one. So what kind of help do people need? Now, I've just put out 4 main ideas that I think would be of help. One is that we come out with the universal old age pension for all individuals over the age of 70, except for those who are already on government pension or getting SOCSO ILAT. And this pension should be $300 per month per person. So it's an old couple, for example, above 70, both the husband and the wife both will get 300 each. Now, I'm putting this forward because even before the pandemic, older people, most older people, about 80% of the older people in the country are without any income and without any savings once they're above 70. And now with COVID and with especially the poorer sectors, the people in the non-formal sector, the people in the people running small businesses, micro businesses, their parents, their grandparents are even worse off because they have got no income, and their children also are struggling. So this will really help a group of people who are really in need now. And I put a costing to that. There's an estimated 0.8 million people who are above 70 and don't have pension of any sort. It will come to about 2.8, 2.9 billion per year. Okay, so that's one scheme that I think we should consider, one thing to give some social support. The next one, please. The next scheme is something of monthly cash transfers to the P20 families. So P20 means the bottom 20% of families in terms of income. And many of them are going to be non-formal sector workers or micro businesses, yeah. And there are about 1.5 million families, because altogether in Malaysia, you've got about 7.5 million families. So if you go for 300, so you go for 20%, it's 1.5 million families. And the good thing about the government is, a good thing that Najib did for us is he had the BRIM, right? So because of the BRIM, we have a complete list of all the P40 and now even the M40 families on our list, including families as well as individuals. So the government's got the database. So you've got to merge this database together with your SOCSO database, with your EPF active contributor database, to generate this and see which are the poorest 1/5 of families. And this I'm talking of a cash transfer to the accounts of these families monthly, And so if we cost it at $300 a month, 1.5 million families for 12 months comes to $5.4 billion. This is something I think we need now, because as I said earlier, recovery is going to be irregular, affecting people at, different people are going to recover at different rates depending which sector they are and what they're doing. So this I think is very important to keep people out of poverty. There are about 10-15% of families now are really in bad shape. Okay, the next one, please. Next slide. The third thing I think that we should consider doing is increase the health budget by 6 billion this year and every year for the next 4 years. Our current allocation is about 32 billion. And I'm suggesting we should go to 38 billion, then 44 next year, 50 the next year, 56. Because we need more hospitals, we need more staff, we need more community nursing, we need people going out in the community. And if we had a more, I mean, our health system has been fantastic as far as controlling COVID. I think without our national public healthcare system, we would be in a bad shape. Because we had the public healthcare system, it helped us out tremendously. But actually, they're really overworked. You look at our government hospitals, overpacked, too crowded. We need to expand those services. And if we can do that, then people don't need to go for private insurance. Now, a lot of, not so much B40, but M40 families are forced to take private insurance, not because they want to go private, but because they're scared that government treatment will come too late, that the waiting list will be too long. They got to wait too long for the MRI or the CT scan, the surgery will be delayed. So they take it as a defensive position, but it costs them quite a lot. I think it's about $3,000 a year or more, depending on the family. So it's a heavy load. So we had a good healthcare system, people won't need to take private insurance, which is a burden on them. This is the third thing that I think we should consider doing going forward now. The fourth point would be, next slide, please. The fourth point would be to expand the SOCSO scheme. Now, let me explain. The SOCSO has got two parts to it. One is the SOCSO accident injury scheme, which it's only when you get injured you get it, like injured at work, on the way to work you get it. The other one is a permanent disability scheme, what they call the pension ILAT, and that is for people who are disabled by anything. It can be by an accident, even not at work. It can be due to an illness, so they cannot work, and this will give you pension for life. Now the thing is, the SOCSO only covers those in the formal sector. The 6.5 million workers who are in the formal sector covered by SOCSO. The people who are contract workers in the non-formal sector, the micro businesses, the roti canai seller, the goreng pisang stall person, all the peasants, the rubber tappers, the nelayan are not covered by SOCSO. So I'm suggesting that for the second scheme, the permanent disability scheme, the government pays for them. Now this scheme requires a 1% of your salary to be paid in monthly to SOCSO. So that comes out to 1%. Let's take assumed income of 1,005 for 6 billion people, 12 months. It comes to $1 billion. But for $1 billion, the government pays. It can cover 6 million people who are, currently uncovered, and it will give them a good kind of cover in case they get a stroke or they get a heart attack, they get a cancer, they cannot work before the age of 60. This will kick in and give them some kind of pension. So next slide, please. So if you look at these things, it comes up to a total, I just costed it, because when we talk about these kind of schemes, we really got to talk about how much is the total cost, and it comes to about 15 billion. Now, this is out of our total budget now this year is about 300 billion. So it is something I think doable. It's about 5% of our budget. And of course, there are important questions we've got to talk about. The question of where the funds, next slide, where the funds are going to come from. That'll take another webinar. We can discuss that, where the funds are going to come from. The next slide, please. And this will take time to discuss where to get the funds from. But it is an important question too, because we can give all the good ideas and they're all expensive. Then where is money going to come from? We're going to discuss that. The other issue I just want to talk about before I stop is, next slide, please. The issue of moral hazard. I think a lot of people are worried. Next slide, please. A lot of people are worried that if you help out the poor, it is bad for the country. They get lazy. They will not work hard. It develops a kind of handout mentality. Next slide, please. If you look at Malaysia, I think we got to recognize that we are trapped in a low wage economy. These are our cleaners in schools. They pay the minimum wage. It's 1,002 per month. The take home is only about 1,062 when they cut off the EPF and SOCSO. They only get 1,062 when they go home. Next slide, please. Now, this is in Australia. The same work in Australia, at the minimum wage in Australia of $19 Australian, 84 cents per hour, they get 12,500 Malaysian ringgit per month. So that's the difference in the wage. Of course, okay, you can say the wage in Australia, I mean, the cost of living in Australia is 2.5 times, 3 times more. Okay, you divide 12,005 by 3, you still get about 4,000 plus. So the real wages, the real income in terms of buying power of an Australian cleaner is about 3 times plus our cleaners. That's the reality, because of the way in which we are articulated into the global economy, we are forced to use low wages so we can get FDI, that our investors don't run away, that we don't lose foreign markets. So we are stuck in this low wage economy. It's not the fault of our workers. It's not that our workers are not or less productive. Don't tell me our cleaner is 10 times less productive than a cleaner in Australia, or a factory worker in Bayan Lepas comes out as semiconductors. They only earn about 1/5 of what the same worker would earn in California. So we got to remember that. Next slide, please. So we got to see the social support programs are not alms they're giving to beggars, undeserved cash handouts. But if you look at the right-hand corner, it's partial compensation. Go back, please. For the low wage regime that we are forcing our people to undergo, because we cannot fight against the multinationals, we can't fight against the global system. So we are forced to go on a low wage regime. And so when I talk about these various programs like pension for the old, cash support and all these things, yeah. So I'll be winding up very soon. So we got to look at our social benefit programs as something which is legitimate, something that is not going to make our people weak. It's something that is needed because we are forcing them to accept very low wages. So anyway, these are things I think we can discuss later. A lot of things we have to discuss. Next slide, please. I'm going to my last slide. So thank you all very much for listening. There's a lot we're going to discuss regarding where the money is going to come from and what other social benefit programs that we can propose. So I think I'll stop here and thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Jeyakumar. Sorry, I have to stop you just now. I sent a private message to Dr. Jeyakumar to remind him about the time. Okay, thank you for a very rich and informative presentation. And without further ado, let's move on to the second speaker, Karen Lai. Karen is a member of the Top Up Women Only Additional Seats, or TOAS in short. I don't know whether I pronounce it correctly or not. Is a working group under the Penang State Government. She is currently the Program Director of the Women's Center for Change, and she began her career as an advocate and solicitor, practicing law for 7 years. And from 2012 to 2018, she worked on women's political representation with the Penang Women's Development Corporation, PWDC, as a program manager for women's empowerment and leadership, and as the Chief Operating Officer of the Selangor Women's Empowerment Institute, or in Bahasa, Institut Wanita Berdaya Selangor, respectively. During this period, one of her key focus areas was gender and electoral reform. Please, you can take over the mic. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Por. Good evening, everyone. Dr. Kumar, Dr. Ariffin, it's an honor to share the stage with you tonight and also to see many familiar names amidst the guests. Let me just quickly share my screen. Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, just 1 second. Okay, so my topic tonight is going to be a little bit different, I suppose, and I would like to talk to you about Penang's Top Up Women Only Additional Seats, which has been touted as Penang's bold 3-in-1 experiment. Tonight, we're talking about recovering from the pandemic, rebuilding and setting new directions for society, and we're looking at systemic issues in terms of politics and the economy. So I want to share what's happening in Penang. You may have read about it, but here's a little bit more of a deep dive tonight. On the 10th of December 2020, our Chief Minister launched the TOAS initiative. And just going to share a bit more about it with you. So I'll talk about, firstly, the background of the situation of women's political representation in the country. Then I'll dive into TOAS and how it works, steps towards implementation, and last but not least, how you here tonight, perhaps if you're interested, could support TOAS. So I'd like to start by quoting one of my favorite feminist writers, Rebecca Solnit, and she says that we are designed to respond with alarm to something that just happened, that breaches norms, but not to things that have been going on for decades or centuries. She said this in the context of a recent article in The Guardian about how air pollution has actually killed more people to date than COVID-19, and also in the context of her excellent work on violence against women that she's been doing for decades. So I would like to say that I think women's political underrepresentation is one such issue. It's something that has kind of just flown under the radar in the midst of the pandemic, including other more pressing issues such as domestic violence, for instance, that have occurred in terms of women's issues in the wake of the pandemic. But it's there, and it's an issue that we need to look at. Malaysia has committed to gender equality in politics for well over 25 years, since CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against all Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and also the Beijing Platform for Action. So you see in CEDAW Article 7 that there is a commitment by our government to equality in public and political life, as well as a commitment to a minimum 30% of women in decision making, which is known as the minimum critical mass in order to bring meaningful change to the table. We're also looking at things like the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG Goal 5, which looks at equality of decision-making in political, economic, and public life. In short, women don't just have equal rights to vote, we have equal rights to decision-making and to be represented at all levels of political leadership. Yet globally, Malaysia lags far behind in terms of women's political representation. The World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap report for 2020 ranks us 104 out of 153 countries, with political empowerment at an even worse ranking of 117 out of 153. Whereas in terms of Interparliamentary Union IPU data 2021, we rank 145 out of 190 for women's representation in parliament. And we have never exceeded 14.9% of such representation in parliament. At state legislature level, the Dewan Undangan Negeri, things are slightly better. This graph indicates the level of women's political representation in the different state assemblies, and you have Selangor here at the highest at 21.43%, followed by Johor at 16.07% and Penang at 15%. So it's not great either. We haven't actually achieved the minimum critical mass of 30%. In the Penang Dewan Undangan Negeri specifically, you're looking at a 15% representation, constant since 2013. Okay, that works out to 6 out of 40 members that are elected in the Dewan Undangan Negeri. So Pumzile Mlambo Nkuka, the UN Women Executive Director, has indicated that we really need to speed things up and move faster. If we keep going at this rate, it will take another 50 years to achieve gender equality in politics. She says, all in all, there is progress, but not yet enough and too slow. We need big, bold steps and not incremental ones. And she made this statement last year during the 25th anniversary of the World Conference, 4th World Conference of Women and the Beijing Platform for Action. So incidentally, CEDAW, the Women's Convention, under Article 4, requires that temporary special measures be put into place to accelerate de facto equality in political decision-making between women and men. And TOAS is one such form of that. Yeah? I'll come to that shortly. So I would say that in a sense, the ground was laid. There were several critical success factors for TOAS to occur in Penang. It didn't just come out of nowhere. First of all, Penang has an established state machinery for gender equality and social justice. The Penang Women's Development Corporation was established back in 2011 and came into operations in 2012. So that's about 10 years of, laying the ground, talking about gender sensitization, gender responsive budgeting, and so on. So, of course, policies, programs, and visibility on women's leadership were also very much in place. The conversation on gender and electoral reform, including women-only seats or reserved seats like TOAS, first began in 2016, as far back as 5 years ago in 2016, in Penang, which hosted the first national conference on gender and electoral reform. Since then, Penang has gone on to institutionalize a minimum of 30% women local councillors, and has come to pass a gender inclusiveness policy of 40-40-20 ratio in terms of gender balance in decision making, as well as I want to highlight a safe family policy for the state, which was put into place in the wake of COVID-19 out of concerns for the rising levels of domestic violence. So very clearly, there's a very strong impetus to take forth the gender agenda in the state. And with the Chief Minister's endorsement of this initiative, we see clear-cut political will, executive sponsorship, as well as champions for this within the Exco itself. So I come to TOAS. What is TOAS? Top up women-only additional seats. Essentially, it's a temporary special measure to accelerate women's representation to a minimum of 30% in the Penang State Assembly or the Dewan. Now, the important thing to remember is it's a conditional measure. It only applies when you have fewer than 30% of elected state assembly persons or Arduins who are women. Currently, we have 15%, as I mentioned. And it is temporary in nature in that it's proposed for a maximum of 2 terms only, after which it is hoped that we will be able to achieve gender balance organically, so to speak, through state elections. So how does it work? Essentially, TOAS creates another path within our first past the post existing system towards a more gender inclusive state assembly. You have got voters there, the top, you see the top line of red arrows, voting, casting 1 vote for their representative of choice for the constituency. Okay, and the candidates getting elected into FPTP seats and eventually becoming elected members of the House. What we do with TOAS is actually look at the proportion of votes received by different parties, the overall vote share. There is a party list of women-only candidates that are put up, and party list seats are allocated according to the vote share of the parties, leading to women being nominated as additional members of the House. And both these elected and nominated members comprise the legislature in total. I'll explain a little bit more in the coming slides. So as I said, you know, these are additional women-only seats. They are calculated based on the vote share. They are filled by appointment and not by election. And importantly, they are also non-constituency seats. That is, they're not tied up to any particular kawasan or constituency. Okay. So using the 14th general election scenario as an example, how would these additional seats work? On the left, you see a depiction of the breakdown of seats. Before TOAS, you have a total of 40 Dewan seats, 6 of which are occupied by women. These are elected representatives, 5 of them from Pakatan Harapan and 1 from Barisan Nasional. Okay, so if you were to work on the existing shortage or the existing scenario, you would be adding 9 seats, additional 9 seats that are women-only seats, 6 for Pakatan Harapan, 2 for Barisan Nasional, and 1 for PAS, based on the vote share. And this would give you 15 women out of 49 total members of the Dewan, resulting in 30.6% of women's representation in the House. Okay. So this is just a rough breakdown of the calculation that is proportionate to the vote share. And because they are proportionate based on the vote share, they reflect the voters' democratic will and benefit all parties fairly, as opposed to free-for-all seats like perhaps Sabah and Terengganu and Pahang, where there are no such restrictions that are calculated based on the percentage of women's representation and so on. Okay. So I want to emphasize the point that the number of these women-only additional seats will vary depending on the number of elected women Arduins. So you see here, it's like a sliding scale of the numbers. Currently, we are at elected Arduins. You've got, they're in blue, and you have got 6 elected Arduins at the moment. The number of seats that you need to top up to make 30% would be 9, okay, correspondingly here. But if you had a situation where you had 12 women that elected out of the 40, then you would not need TOAS at all. It would effectively become redundant because it's only a temporary special measure. to make up the numbers. So how do you decide which women or who gets appointed into TOAS? Basically, this matter is decided by the political parties, depending on their vote share, and also subject to certain requirements, including compliance with the state constitution. You will need to meet these requirements in order to be a nominated representative. We would also be looking at requirements of diversity, of ethnicity, religion, age, and so on. So the conversation has started about the importance of representing youth, OKU, single mothers, and so on. Thirdly, we would be proposing compulsory gender advocacy training because it's critical that the additional nominated women be able to analyze issues from a gender perspective and offer gender responsive solutions to problems the state face. And finally, there is a discussion that there should be a one-term limit for Arduins that are nominated through this system. Okay. So in terms of non-constituency seats, essentially Arduins occupy seats that serve, they're non-constituency. So in other words, they're not limited to particular constituencies. They cover all of Penang. TOAS Arduins portfolios will be issue-based. In other words, they handle a wide range of issues, not just women and gender. And the proposal here is for select committees, special select committees on various issues to be set up in the Dewan, where these TOAS Arduins can play a critical role focusing on policy. So they'll be focusing less on day-to-day concerns in the Kawasan, but rather broad-based issues such as health, education, transportation, the environment, and so on for the entire state. Okay. So many people ask us, what's the difference between an elected Ardun and a TOAS Ardun who occupies the women-only nominated seat? I'll talk about the similarities and the differences. The first similarity would be they're both entitled to stand as candidates in the election. We've got some feedback about that. We're still in the process of discussing it, but basically that's one similarity. Two, it is proposed that they be given the same rights and powers to vote in the Dewan. 3, they can both be members of select committees on various issues. And 4, they would receive an Ardun salary. What is the difference between both? 1, elected Arduins would serve specific constituency or Kawasans, whereas TOAS Arduins would serve non-constituency seats for all the state. 2, the constituency allocation would be received in addition to the salary for elected Arduins, whereas for TOAS Arduins, there is no specific constituency allocation. They might receive a little bit of allocation for research assistance and so on, but the nature of their work is a little different. 3, and very importantly, the elected Ardun is eligible to become the chief minister or a member of the EXCO, whereas the TOAS Ardun would not hold the same eligibility. 4, there's no term limit technically to the elected Ardun, whereas the TOAS Ardun has term limits imposed. And finally, if there's a vacancy for the position of the elected Ardun, a by-election would be needed to replace the elected Ardun, whereas for the TOAS Ardun, there would be an automatic replacement by the party and no by-election would be necessary because it's by appointment. So in other words, in the words of my colleague, Dr. Wong Chin Huat, who's a fellow member of the TOAS working group, we both work with a team of people under YB Chong Eng, the state exco for women. TOAS covers 3 things. So it's Penang's bold 3-in-1 experiment: gender inclusion, electoral system innovation, and legislative reform. You're looking at doing things differently, doing politics differently, and moving forward with issue-based leadership. So what next from here? We are currently having stakeholder consultations, which are ongoing. In fact, tonight, as we speak, the Tamil language webinar, we've had 4 webinars on TOAS. The Tamil language webinar is going on right now. We will gather feedback and plan based on this feedback. And there are formal amendments to the state constitution, as well as the enactment of a state regulation that would be involved in this process. And we're also working with the state legal advisor on this matter, following which we hope to implement and subsequently monitor and evaluate as soon as possible. So what can you do? And this is my last slide. First of all, if you have any concerns, interests, and in fact, as many of you are academics, if you have research interests of the matter, in fact, please drop us a line at toas@pwdc.org.my. We'd be very happy to hear from you. Secondly, if you could write about us, opinions, articles. I know friends from Aliran have written a great article about it in support. That would be fantastic. We do need that support. 3, if your organization could issue a press statement, that would be great as well. And of course, last but not least, do post your public support on social media and spread the word to your networks. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Karen, for an engaging presentation. And feminism is the radical idea that men and women are equal. Meanwhile, there are at least 2 questions for you, Karen, while we are listening to the third speaker. Perhaps you would like to read the comment first. Now we move on to the last speaker, Dr. Ariffin Omar. Dr. Ariffin Omar was an academic of nearly 40 years experience, having taught at USN, UUM, and UPNM. He was appointed a senator for 2 terms from 2012 to 2018. He's also author of a famous book titled Bangsa Melayu, Malay Concepts of Democracy and Community, 1945 to 1950. That's an interesting book. Thank you, Dr. Ariffin, for accepting the invitation. Now it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank GERAK for inviting me to participate in this important forum. If I'm not mistaken, this is probably the first few forums organized on what should be done to the country after the pandemic comes to an end. That is, if it comes to an end. It's coming in waves now. Ironically, the government of the day hasn't a clue for what should be done to deal with a totally changed situation in Malaysia, resulting from the pandemic. There's yet to be a government committee looking into the post-pandemic strategies that should be adopted by the country to face a future that has changed beyond all recognition. Now, be that as it may, there are a few suggestions I would like to put forward. Now, in Malaysia, for many of us, I'm going to a very basic level. Social security is important. What more do we want? With the onset of the pandemic, I've seen thousands thrown out of jobs, businesses collapsing, long food queues, homelessness and poverty on a scale beyond comprehension. Well, it is very, very clear that some jobs will no longer be relevant, while new opportunities left to be found. The first priority of the government of the day is to cushion the unemployment situation. Well, we need unemployment insurance more than ever. Malaysia can afford to give unemployment insurance underwritten by the employer as well as the government to safeguard the interests of workers when a crisis like the pandemic hits us. Now, the occasional cash handouts are definitely inadequate and, in my opinion, really comical. A well-planned approach to help workers, especially the B40 group and those below that group, to deal with the loss in jobs should be in place. Unfortunately, what we have is just BRIM and a few other financial handouts, which is given more out of political advantages rather than a real attempt to help those hovering just above the poverty line. Of course, I've raised this issue before in Parliament. The government turns around and says, where are you going to get the money from? You think the economy can support the demands you're putting forward? Well, my answer to that is, to do this, the economy must be overhauled and revamped. What we need to do is, we've got to get rid of monopolistic economic enterprises that are really bleeding the country. They should be replaced by cooperatives that are run efficiently and honestly. While some industries may require intensive labor, it is vital that locals be employed with fair salaries instead of foreigners employed for a pittance in order to ensure huge profits for certain individuals. In other words, we need a more honest and just economic system to serve the needs and interests of the people. I admit this cannot be done overnight, but it must be planned for now. If we are not going to start, when are we going to go on this path? Now, Malaysia is not like any other country. When we talk of issues in Malaysia, we cannot divorce ourselves from the ethnic dichotomies that exist. This is one reality we cannot shy away from. How do we overcome the ethnic animosities, suspicions, antagonism? Now, in a multi-ethnic society like Malaysia, I personally believe that a good education system should be in place to replace the present system that has failed dismally to serve the welfare and needs of our society. Education, as all of you will be aware, is a great leveler. It affords an opportunity for the poor and underprivileged to rise above their poverty and disadvantage and move up to a social status, to a better station in life based on their merits. Now, sadly, education in Malaysia has been subverted for political interests and has been used as a tool to divide and disenfranchise people. Now, the wealthy and privileged sectors of society get the best education as they can pay for it. You really believe that the pandemic is affecting them? Not at all. Their children are still getting the education in spite of the pandemic that's putting out so many other children out of school. The wealthy and privileged sectors of society get the best education. Why? Because they can pay for it. The poor and dispossessed get the barest minimum just to read and write, but not to think, analyze, and be creative. In short, they are trained to be just workers, to be what I would call the lumpen proletariat. Such is the case when education becomes an enterprise for generating profits. If private schools, colleges, and universities are entirely driven by profit, who can afford to be educated beyond secondary and primary schools? Can the poor afford to send their children to private schools where quality education is available? Public schools are poorly maintained. Teachers are undertrained and not motivated or dedicated because teaching is no longer seen as a noble profession. Where are we heading? We can and we should do something about the ills that plague our education system. But is the government willing to act? Or is it too busy playing ethnic politics and looking into ways it means to dip into the public coffers for personal enrichment? Undoubtedly, you may disagree with me. We are one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Believe me, all that money that we lose to corruption can be used for the benefit of society. We will be able to overcome the seriousness of unemployment that we are facing right now. Now, in terms of providing medical facilities to the public, well, I will accept that Malaysia has done reasonably well in comparison to many other countries. Well, others may question this point. I'm sure Dr. Devaraj would feel that, it would do even better. I would agree with him. I feel that the government has acted positively in overcoming the COVID-19 epidemic in the country. However, there are some negative points. Coordination between states and central governments on coordinating strategies to deal with the epidemic is in fact not smooth at all. What surprises me is that though we have renowned research centers, Institute of Medical Research was well known, it's globally known. But I ask myself, with all the experience that they had, with all the professionals that they have, why aren't we able to provide our own vaccines? Now, you look at the history of the IMR. It did sterling work in the past on malaria, rabies, smallpox, cholera, etc. Today, what do you hear of it? If I haven't brought it up, nobody would have thought it's still in existence. Don't we have the expertise of the personnel to do research on COVID-19? If so, why is this so? Now, if you look back, we have had close calls with deadly viruses. Can you forget the Nipah virus that originated in 1998 in Malaysia? Haven't we prepared for the possibilities that other dangerous epidemics might emerge, not in Malaysia, but somewhere, and still pose a threat to us sooner or later? We must face reality that COVID-19 won't be the last threat to us, and that there are others that may turn up. Are we prepared to face these threats on our own? In such a crisis, many countries won't be generous to share the vaccines with you. In fact, now there's a scramble for vaccines. Some countries are left out because they don't have the money to buy them. Now, Another vital aspect in setting a new direction for society is the need to ensure that we have food security. Only when this pandemic hits us did I realize that our food security is lacking. I had raised this issue during the 6 years I was in the Senate, but the answers I received was anything but reassuring. Now, the worst decision that was made by a former PM in Malaysia to do away with the University of Agriculture on the belief that by 2020, we will be a developed country with not much use for agriculture. Well, 2020 has come and gone. We are neither industrialized, nor are we agriculturally advanced when compared to countries like Thailand, Vietnam, or a country ravaged by war, and even Indonesia, which we used to snigger at in the past. These countries were once way behind us. Look at them now. They have a flourishing industrial base as well as good agricultural foundations. What have we achieved? The neglect of building our agricultural base has ensured that we do not have food security. Now, for the moment, for as long as we can pay for food imports, there will be a few mutterings of dissatisfaction. But if we become economically stagnant, and that may be looming up pretty soon, and we are unable to attract FDI, and with many established foreign companies now leaving Malaysia for other Asian states, we may be faced with a looming disaster. I could go on and on ad infinitum about discussing the various shortcomings and what we should be doing to ensure that Malaysia will remain viable and prosperous in the future. Indeed, rebuilding and setting a new direction for society and the country will depend on changes in our political culture and system. This is really vital. To take the first fledgling steps towards rebuilding and setting a new direction, I would like to ask, is our society prepared to do away with entrenched racism existing in the political system? Are Malaysians prepared to do away with parties based on race? Are Malays and non-Malays prepared to put their hopes and build support for parties that are multi-ethnic and fighting for a just deal for all? If the answer is yes, then Malaysia has a future to progress and perhaps be a symbol of harmony and prosperity for others to follow. Now, next point. Are Malaysians prepared to, as well as willing to fight and defend the rule of law in this country? Well, if we say we are, then the corrupt, dishonest, and criminally inclined political leaders, public servants in government agencies and institutions must be removed and prosecuted. If we countenance and accept criminal behavior without batting an eyelid, I mean, there are some convicted felons that seem to be walking about freely, occasionally making snide comments about the political situation, about the situation in this country, as if they are not guilty of the crimes for which they've already been charged and sentenced. And I think you know whom I'm referring to. Now, if we can countenance this type of behavior by convicted felons, then we deserve the fate that will befall us. In history, you must remember, Rome did not fall in a day. It fell because of misgovernment, rank corruption, and utter disregard for the law and morality over a period of time. Frankly, if you really ask me, we are all well on our way to perdition, on the road to perdition. It is a matter of time before disaster strikes. Now, I've often mentioned this here. In all the things that we say and do, and in our everyday lives, we assume that this country that we call Malaysia will remain as it is till eternity. I beg to disagree. I have stated in the Senate that a powerful nation like the Soviet Union collapsed. Countries like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Sudan have split with components going their own way. Can we say that we'll be free from such a fate? Let us remember, Singapore seceded from Malaysia in 1965. Not a good precedent or omen. Why did it succeed? I'm sure you know the reason. The pandemic has really opened up the fault lines in the Malaysian state, if these were not apparent before the pandemic. Unless we have good governance, with a clear-cut policy to develop our resources, be it human or economic, and more important, a government that respects law and order and caters to the need of all, we will not need another pandemic to have an idea of where we are heading. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ariffin, for an interesting presentation. Now, let me open up the floor for Q&A. But before, let me pick some of the questions from the chat box first. There's actually an audience whose name is Chi Kyong. He sent through direct, private message. He has a question for Dr. Jeyakumar. He asked, Dr. Jaya, I think the value drop of Malaysian currency also has impact on the wages. How do we handle this problem? So perhaps Dr. Jeyakumar would like to respond first.
Okay. I think the main issue affecting our wages is because we are competing with other countries like Vietnam or Thailand for producing goods. For example, let's take oil palm. If we raise the wages of our oil palm workers above what it's paid in, say, Indonesia, and our oil palm is more expensive, we lose the market to Indonesia. Similarly, when you're making, say, shoes and exporting it to Europe, and we raise our wages higher than, say, Vietnam, higher than Thailand, much higher, then again, so those are the factors. The fact that we are competing with each other to keep our wages down, so we can produce goods that we can sell to the Western market cheaply and gain market share. That's the main dynamic going on. Of course, if your currency goes down, then I guess your cost of your imports go up, inflation comes in, imported inflation comes in, so your real wage goes down that way. Yet it makes it worse, But that is not the real problem. The real problem is the fact that the way in which developing countries like Malaysia are articulating the global economy is in a way that makes us part of the race to the bottom. We're scared to tax them, because if we tax them too high, they will go and invest elsewhere, or they'll put the headquarters elsewhere and transfer their profits. We're scared to raise minimum wages too high, because same reason. And it's also the reason why you bring in foreign workers, because they work for lower wages. So this is a systemic thing because of the structure of the global economy. And I think I see that as the main problem. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jeyakumar. And I think Professor Tay Kun, she has a question or a comment for all speakers. She said, dear speakers, the homeless have been left out of the system because to be registered for welfare with the government, they need to have an address. That is the irony. Please bring this up with the relevant ministry. Eradicating poverty is SDG #1 and zero hunger is SDG #2. Our government has the duty to ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you. So I think this is just a comment. And Mr. Kumar Menon has a question to Karen. Yeah, perhaps Karen would like to respond?
Certainly, Dr. Por, if I may respond to Mr. Kumar Menon and Mr. Tan Chi Kyong together. They both talked about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on women. And the reason I didn't raise directly issues affecting women during COVID-19 pandemic was that I assumed the focus of this webinar tonight was on the ways forward. We have been speaking about issues affecting women and children during the pandemic for the better part of the last year. Let me just highlight some of the existing gaps that were exacerbated by the pandemic for women and children. First of all, we saw consistently with global trends a clear-cut increase in domestic violence. During the lockdown period, it was very, very difficult for women to escape violent homes. We saw a 20% increase in our calls, and this was also reflected by the numbers in our sister organizations throughout the country. We saw a rise in online violence against women. 60% of our hotline calls in 2020 involved some form of online violence against women, including violence by spouses or intimate partners against each other. Things like abuse, threatening to leak intimate photos, hacking of social media accounts, and so on and so forth. So this could be a response to the increasing digitalization that is going on. Thirdly, child sexual abuse remains a very serious concern for us. 70% of the court cases we support at WCC involve children below 18 years old. In 2020, 40% of the victims we saw of sexual abuse were between 7 to 12 years old, and boys doubled in number, with over 90% of the perpetrators being known to the victims and their families. 35% of them also were parents, okay? So you're looking at a very serious issue, serious concerns about children in lockdown as well, especially when their main caregivers are the ones that are most liable to abuse them. We also saw delays in the court system, which meant that victims have slower access to justice. We saw worsened gaps in terms of employment. We know that women are overrepresented in informal sectors. They're overrepresented in sectors such as tourism, travel, and so on and so forth. So that's been badly hit by the pandemic. And the female unemployment rate has also increased compared to the male unemployment rate as a result of the pandemic. So you're looking at these massive issues, and I don't know how to answer your question to say whether we are coping better socially, and I don't think so. I think certainly the gaps have worsened, if nothing else. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And I think Yakut has another question for you, Karen, regarding trans women. That's right. The organization. Yeah.
That's right. I actually have another two questions, but I would like to give way. Dr. Por, perhaps the other speakers may want to take other questions first. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Actually, just now, I think Dr. Ariffin was also responding to Dr. Jeyakumar's presentation, right? I don't know whether Dr. Jeyakumar would like to respond to Dr. Ariffin's presentation when it was. He seems to have a different view, or yeah.
Okay. I think it's quite similar. I think we agree on a number of things. But perhaps this thing about we're talking about whether we can do away with ethnic-based political parties. I agree we've got to move away from ethnic politicking, but challenging people to give up their security blanket as the first step might be the wrong way. The better way may be that we need to show that we are Malaysians, we are concerned about the problems of poverty or of exclusion in other communities as well, and we are serious about solving those problems. And that's why I feel that, in a way, what happened in the Pakatan period, in a way, is a big tragedy for us, because at the beginning, during the 2018 elections, we had about almost 30% of the Malay electorate were prepared to vote for a coalition that wasn't so openly ethnic, and the policies were supposed to be, better governance, looking after everyone, and especially what Anwar will talk about, helping all the races and all that. But unfortunately, during the 22 months, there were policies that made Malays feel threatened, feel apprehensive. For example, in Sungai Siput, I was the MP in Sungai Siput then. When the Pakatan came into power, they cut the subsidy that was being given to rubber smallholders who were getting payment into their bank accounts each time the kaplam of rubber dropped below 220. They'll get a little bit of money into their bank account depending on how much rubber they sold that month. And that was stopped. And almost half the people in the rural part of Sungai Siput are connected to the rubber trade. So it's a small thing. It didn't save the government very much. Similarly, the fisherman subsidy was cut. So I don't think many of the Malays who supported Pakatan, they wanted the kleptocrats. They saw that the rich elites within UMNO were making use of their poverty to make money, and they prepared to talk about that. But when they saw the package came, it seemed to be a cutaway support for Malay poor. On the grounds that it makes them weak, they are malas, it will make them, have a handout culture. So I think we played our cards wrong then. We should have kept those kind of programs for the Malay poor. I mean, stop the kleptocracy at the top, but we So what happened even before the fall of the government, the by-elections we had at the end of 2019, you saw the Malay support for Pakatan Harapan had dropped to about 17%, 15%, Cameron Highlands and this one in the south in Johor. So I think, coming back to what Ariffin talked about, to build a multiracial, non-ethnic political movement, we need to go to the ground and work with disadvantaged communities. We can't go and challenge people and say, give up your ethnic party. That comes at the end. It comes at the end of building a movement that is focusing on poverty of all ethnic communities. And then when people are comfortable that you are sincere with that, you really want to do that, they'll probably jettison their ethnic political parties, because many of the ethnic political parties actually are making use of them. Making use of the poverty of Malays to get programs, but a lot of the benefit goes to the richer people, to the contractors, to the people of connections with the minister. They get the main. That's what's been happening, and I think they can see it. That's why 30% of them did vote for Pakatan, but we weren't able to consolidate that. Some of the things we did the opposite. So that's what we got to look at, and see how do we build back now? How do we build this multiracial movement focusing on the need of everyone? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Jeyakumar. And I think I actually have a question for Dr. Ariffin regarding how to build, a multiracial party, and how to move towards that goal. And you also talk about education. I don't know whether you want to elaborate more in terms of education, because our education at this moment is so divided.
Sure.
It's so fragmented. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do my best to give some. Now, you're talking about building a multiracial party first, isn't it? A multiracial party group. Am I correct? Or you want it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's part of it, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Now, okay. Let me put it this way. I think I stick to education. I believe that a phenomena is there which many people can see but choose to ignore. Okay, we look at Sekolah Kebangsaan, where the medium of instruction is in Malay and so forth and so on. When I was in Parliament, I was curious. I did ask the minister, can you explain to me why so many Malay kids, more than 30 over 1,000, maybe 40 over 1,000 to 45,000, are attending Sekolah Jenis Kebangsaan Cina? See, I mean, you want to promote the Malay language, you want to promote, what is it? You're trying to do away with the vernacular education and all that. But yet, a lot of Malay kids are going to Chinese language schools. Now, I thought about it and I asked myself, why? Not that I'm against it, I'm all for it. When I talked to some of these Malay parents, the answer they gave me was amazing. They say that firstly, education in these Chinese schools is better. The quality is good. They learn Mandarin. They improve on the English. Bahasa Malaysia is not a problem for them. And with the education that they go, the social mobility that they can enjoy is pretty good compared with the educational system that is a monolingual system if they go to the Sekolah Kebangsaan view. This speaks a lot. If Malays can conceive and go to a Chinese school, I think the hope of building a truly multi-ethnic party is there. The mixture between Malays and Chinese in these Chinese schools does make for a difference. And I met many Malays who go to Chinese schools. The understanding of the Chinese, the culture, helps them. And it lessens that kind of ethnic tension that you get between the Malays and non-Malays. When you have Malays, you have gone to these Chinese schools, they understand. Now, the trouble is that in this country, when you want to really, really set up a truly multi-racial grouping, as Devaraj has pointed out, you really, really need to go down to the grassroots. Unfortunately, not many of them can do it. And if you go as individuals, you're not going to get very far. It has to be done systematically and on an organized basis. Now, I'll be very frank here. I'm a member of the DAP. I'm sure you all know that. The DAP is multiracial. Of course, it is, no doubt about it. The party is very clear about it stands for all races. But the thing that's always bothered me is that when general elections come, why is it that the DAP does not put up Malay candidates in Malay areas and try to win those seats instead of outsourcing it to other political parties? That's the part I cannot understand at all. And it affects me very badly. I'm bringing it out openly now. There's no reason to hide it. Is there a hidden agenda to it? I cannot understand. I'm still a member of the DAP, but this bothers me. That is why, I mean, what Devaraj said is quite correct. If you really want to do it, it has to be at the grassroots levels. But grassroots levels only lead you to a certain direction. I know I was in Aliara. We were involved in it for years and years. To build up the organization, at any one time, the most we had was not less than 100 individuals in Aliara. So that is a dilemma which we face. How do we go out and build up a truly multi-ethnic entity that is genuinely committed to bringing about change for everyone on an equal basis?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ariffin, for the response. And perhaps now we go back to some of the questions in the chat box. I think I don't. Karen hasn't really responded to Yekun's question about trans women, and also a question from Professor Rossley regarding the reason that there is not enough women elected because there is not enough women candidates. So the effort should be to increase the number of women standing for election rather than trying to increase the number of women elected. So these two questions for Karen.
Certainly. I'll start with Prof. Yekun's question about trans women. Yes, our organization recognizes that your identity as a woman is a construct of, is your gender, which is a social construct of the biological. So we do see them as women. We do believe that they are entitled not to be discriminated against at the very least. And we are part of a coalition known as the Joint Action Group for Gender Equality. And we have sister organizations as well working together. In particular, at the moment, today, the news came out that Putrajaya is set to go ahead to increase punishments against the LGBT community by increasing sentencing limits in the Sharia Courts Criminal Jurisdiction Act. So you certainly see a clampdown against the LGBT community, including the trans community, in the treatment of trans individuals like Nur Sajat and so on. So this is clearly an issue that we stand with that community for. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. As for Prof. Rossley, I wish it were that simple to just fill more women and increase the representation rate. I think it's a lot more complex than that. Women face many barriers at the systemic level, structural level, and most often of all at the cultural level to make it through the political ranks. And so I think given the vast gaps in equality at this point in time, without intervening with this type of temporary special measure, it's going to be hard to see how we can redress these big gaps in political representation. Thank you.
There's one question from Edwin Tan to all speakers. He asks, what are the ways the M40 can help themselves and the B40 in terms of political enfranchisement, given the lack of time they can dedicate to political advocacy? Dr. Jeyakumar first.
Okay, unmuted. Okay, how can the M40? I think I would say join a group, either a political party or an NGO, and reach out to a community in need, preferably one that is a different ethnicity from yours. and try and understand what they are facing and the structural causes for it. Why are they facing what they're facing? And I think you learn a lot. And that kind of activism, that kind of involvement, will then lead you to be part of a process to solve that problem. Helping them articulate, helping them lobby, and it'll build friendships, which will contribute to what Dr. Ariffin talked about, of building a multiracial movement. The multiracial movement is going to come from the ground, and it's going to be brought about by people reaching across the ethnic divide to help out other people. And that's when people will know that, you're being sincere about it. It's not just words, but you're being sincere about it. And that cultural kind of social kind of interaction would also educate both the person going into the other community and as well as the other community itself. And I think that kind of grassroots work is necessary, very needed now in Malaysia to try and solve the social problems and also to build the ethnic divide. So if you have time, go ahead, do it. There's so many groups, whether environmental groups, the social help groups, the food kitchens. There are so many things you can do to go in, but try and work with ethnic communities that are not yours, other ethnic communities, so that we can learn. That's my response.
Perhaps Dr. Ariffin, would you like to respond?
Yes, when I was doing my research in Indonesia for my PhD, there are a lot of groups that you can classify as B40 and M40 there. I find something remarkable about them. In order to survive economically, they form cooperatives. They help each other. And these cooperatives are, well, they may not be very big, but they're well run. And there's some degree of honesty and reasonably good management in it that in a way helps this group to elevate itself from the poverty that they are in. I mean, you must understand, Indonesia is a huge, huge country. And you want to form NGOs, thousands and thousands of them. But these groups that form the cooperatives, these cooperatives are basically an economic cooperative. They are in the same trade, they help each other, and then they set up shops where they buy whatever they need and sell it at a price that is affordable to all. I think this is what Jeyakumar has stated. I mean, we have to help ourselves. And the best way is to begin in this most practical way, in a situation like this.
Okay, thank you. And Karen, how about you?
I'm going to be very brief and very practical and to the point. I'm going to say that if you have no time, then donate money. Okay, there are many groups out there, political parties are struggling, that would always appreciate financial donation to keep up the good work that they do. Bersih, Aliran, groups like GERAK, ESM. So consider that if you have the resources to do so and you do not have the time, although ideally you would have the time and the energy to also get engaged personally. Thank you.
Okay, and even though in the chat box, even though an audience named Tan Chi Kiong, he seems to have a lot of questions, but then to give chances to other audience, I wonder anyone else like to ask any question from the audience seat? You can just on your mic if it's not convenient to type. Would you like to take this last chance to ask any question? If no, then in the interest of time, can I just invite each speaker to convey the last message to the audience before we close this webinar? Maybe we start with Dr. Ariffin, a reverse sequence.
Fine. Well, I'm at a loss as to what message to give. Given the presentation which I made, which if you look at it, it's somewhat rather bleak and foreboding, but I still believe that there is hope for us to get things done together. I think, as Dr. Jeyakumar has pointed out, we took a wonderful risk in the previous election to throw out a rotten government. And though it didn't last that long, the hope is still there. And I still think there's a fair chance. And the thing that is so gratifying to me is that UMNO, which has been the mainstay of a lot of things that are not pleasant, is no longer as powerful as it is. And perhaps that gives a lot of leeway for other alternatives and other options to develop. I think there is some hope finally. We just have to work at it.
Okay, Karen, it's your turn.
Yeah, I just want to end this webinar echoing Dr. Ariffin to say that, to end it on a note of hope, because I think that if we look at, if we want to despair, you know, there's no shortage of reason to despair, but we really need to look at what is possible. And if the old order was broken to begin with, then it's time to construct something new and something different for change. Thank you.
And Dr. Jeyakumar, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Por. I think we've got to remember that COVID is not over yet, you know, not by a long shot. Both health-wise, because you know, when you have it spreading in so many parts of the world, the vaccine is not going out fast enough. You're going to have mutant, you're going to have variants that may come back, and even those vaccinated may still be vulnerable. You know, so those kind of issues are still there. We can't say we are out of COVID yet. You know, I mean, and the economic impact, as I said earlier, is very varied. Some people, some families are really badly affected, and even, you know, paying their rent, meeting their food budget. You know, I see these cases still in Sungai Siput. So we cannot move away from that reality. I would say maybe something like 10% of Malaysian families are really having trouble meeting their basic needs. And I think we can't take our eye off that fact. And the point, and the thing is, I mean, government help has been very, it's good the government did what it did, but the poorest of the poor, the daily paid workers, the contract workers, the really small businesses are not properly covered. You know, it covers more the people in the formal sector. They get more of the aid. And of course, the people right at the top of the ladder, you know, the share prices have gone up and they're doing very well. I mean, you know, so they are okay. But the lower down you go in the social order, the worse off they are and the less help they're getting. So I think we should all look at that very seriously and see what we can do to solve those problems. So some of the things which I mentioned earlier as my 4 things that we need to do, I think are quite important. You know, it's not just an academic thing. People are suffering at the bottom. And this is something coming back to the whole issue of building solidarity and all that. We must show our concern and show it in a practical way and encourage the government to do more. I mean, the government, to its credit, has done quite a bit. You know, I think we've done quite a lot compared to many other governments. But I think somehow the really poor, the bottom 20%, tend to fall between the cracks. You know, I mean, the wage subsidy program doesn't help them. We give income tax relief, it doesn't really go to them. You know, all these things really don't help them. You know, need more directed cash transfer kind of programs for them. So I think we've got to focus on that. Don't take your eye off that ball. The fact that COVID and the COVID-induced downturn is still a reality, and it's going to be around for another year, maybe even 2 years. So I think we got to really focus and make sure kita jaga kita. That idea was good. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jeyakumar. And thank you all 3 speakers. Even though we are not meeting in person, but let's put our hands together for the 3 speakers. And then even though this webinar has come to its end, it's not the end of the conversation. Everyone can carry the conversation on beyond tonight's webinar. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this is the first of a series of an upcoming GERAK ESPACT webinars. Do look up the Facebook page of GERAK or the official page of ESPACT for our future activities. And thank you again. Good night and have a great midweek. But let's not leave the room first. Let's take a group photo. Is that okay for everyone?
Yeah, okay, fine.
Okay. I don't really know how to do this.
I will help. I will help. If those of you here would be happy to be seen.
Yeah, please on your video so that you can be seen, that we can take a group photo together.
If you're comfortable. Many people are in their pajamas by now, so they may not want to appear on the screen. Okay, so everyone ready? Okay, so look at your camera and switch off the chat box. Okay, big smile. 1, 2, 3. One more is back up. 1, 2, 3. Okay, got it. Thank you very much. I will send the photo to the secretariat, to Dr. Por and the secretariat.
Yeah, and then I'll share it with everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah. Good night. Thank you, Dr. Por, Dr. Kumar, Dr. Ariffin, everyone.
Thank you.
Good week.
Good night. Yeah.
Nice meeting all of you. All right. Bye-bye.
Really seems well managed.
Your lunch, Mr.
I'd say rather self-contained.